The wormhole corridor flickered like a faulty neon sign the moment Dorian Vale entered it, which was usually a bad omen unless one enjoyed spontaneous combustion. He tapped the navigation console twice, as if mild physical encouragement might persuade quantum instability to behave. "Easy," he muttered to the ship Horizon Thread. "We've both survived worse decisions." The onboard AI responded with a polite chime that translated loosely to statistically incorrect. Then the stars outside the viewport folded in on themselves like crumpled foil, gravity hiccuped, and the corridor snapped sideways. Dorian had just enough time to regret skipping the advanced astrogation seminar before the ship spiraled through a cascade of luminous fractures and slammed into atmosphere that was definitely not on his flight plan. The descent was loud, bright, and extremely judgmental. He crash-landed into turquoise surf with a hiss of steam and the distinct crunch of expensive hull plating meeting sand. When consciousness returned, it did so reluctantly. Dorian lay sprawled on a beach so picturesque it felt sarcastic, white sand, towering emerald cliffs, and a sky painted in impossible shades of blue. The air hummed faintly, not with insects, but with something deeper, like the low resonance of a distant engine. He rolled onto his back and laughed once, a thin, disbelieving sound. "Well," he said to no one in particular, "at least I'm not dead." The sand beneath him trembled in response, not violently, not yet, more like a thoughtful shiver. Dorian pushed himself upright just as a shadow passed over him, vast and deliberate. He assumed it was a cloud. Then the cloud moved against the wind. From the edge of the jungle emerged a figure so immense that his brain tried to resize the world around her to compensate. She was towering, unquestionably larger than any human structure he had ever docked beside, her silhouette rising like a living monument against the cliffs. Long limbs, elegantly proportioned, stepped onto the shore with careful precision. Her skin carried faint luminous tracery, subtle currents of light flowing along her arms and collarbone like restrained auroras. Her face, high cheekboned and strikingly symmetrical, tilted with measured curiosity. Eyes the color of deep ocean storms fixed on him, and her hair, long, radiant, cascading down her back in waves that caught the sunlight, moved as though gravity favored her personally. Dorian blinked twice. "Right," he whispered. "Dehydration hallucination. Classic." The ground vibrated again as she took another step, and a second towering form appeared behind her, then a third, each equally magnificent and undeniably real. They did not shout or charge. They observed. The air pressure shifted subtly, brushing against his skin like invisible fingertips. His wrist console sparked, scrambling its atmospheric readings in confusion. The planet's magnetic field pulsed in synchronized rhythms, and for a fleeting moment he understood that the humming he had heard was not mechanical. It was biological. The first giantess knelt slightly, reducing the apocalyptic scale of her presence to something only mildly overwhelming. Even so, her face hovered above him like a celestial body contemplating a small and possibly edible moon. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonic undertones that resonated in his ribcage, not loud but impossibly deep. The words were unfamiliar, yet his neural implant struggled to translate them, flickering with partial comprehension. She extended a hand, fingers vast and precise, and before he could protest, he found himself lifted effortlessly from the sand. It was disturbingly gentle, like being scooped up by a gravitational anomaly with excellent manners. "Okay," Dorian said, attempting a diplomatic wave while suspended several meters above ground. "I come in peace." Also mild confusion. The giantess's expression shifted, subtle but unmistakably amused. Around them, the tide paused mid-surge, suspended unnaturally before easing back into place. He felt it then, a strange synchronization prickling at the base of his skull, as though his thoughts were brushing against something ancient and encoded. Whatever this island was, it was not primitive, and whatever these beings were, they were not surprised to see him. Dorian decided very quickly that being carried in the palm of a colossal alien woman was not covered in standard pilot training. He stood carefully, against the smooth warmth of her skin, trying not to think about the fact that one distracted finger twitch could convert him into an unfortunate historical anecdote. "No sudden movements," he whispered to himself. "Preferably from either of us." The giantess studied him with composed intensity, her luminous markings pulsing faintly along her arm in slow, rhythmic waves. Each pulse seemed to coincide with the subtle hum he had felt in the sand earlier. It wasn't random. It was structured, biological but engineered. She brought him closer to her face, not aggressively, just enough for him to see the intricate patterns within her irises, fractals nested inside storm-colored depths. His neural implant sparked again, translating fragments of harmonic syllables that vibrated through her voice. The language did not travel only through air. It carried through pressure shifts, through electromagnetic modulation. His implant struggled, recalibrated, then projected meaning into his auditory cortex. "You are not of the Empire." "Correct," Dorian said quickly. "Independent contractor, extremely independent at the moment." A faint ripple of amusement crossed her expression, subtle but real. Behind her, several other towering figures formed a semicircle along the shoreline. They were similar in scale yet distinct in bearing, each possessing elongated, graceful features and bioluminescent tracery, unique as constellations. None wore armor. None carried weapons. They didn't need to. The atmosphere itself responded to them. A gust of wind curved around their bodies as though politely requesting permission to pass. The giantess holding him shifted her stance, and the tide responded. The waterline retreated several meters, exposing shimmering tidal pools that glowed with embedded biocrystals. Dorian's wrist console, still half-functional, registered gravitational fluctuations so precise they resembled code. These beings were manipulating planetary forces as easily as he adjusted a throttle. The realization sobered him more effectively than fear. "You're not just tall," he murmured. "You're infrastructure." Her gaze sharpened slightly at that, and the harmonic translation clarified further. "We were designed to stabilize worlds." Pressure climate tectonics. Her fingers tightened not painfully but with emphasis. "We refused prescribed bonds. We were exiled." Dorian blinked. Prescribed bonds sounds ominous. A second giantess stepped forward, her voice joining the first in layered resonance. "Genetic consorts assigned to maintain equilibrium. Hierarchical alignment required." The word required echoed with quiet distaste. Dorian shifted his weight in her palm, attempting not to pace in circles like a nervous insect. "So you opted out of mandatory cosmic marriage and got banished to paradise. That's harsh performance review policy." The one holding him angled her head, long hair cascading over her shoulder like molten sunlight. A pulse of energy shimmered faintly across the island canopy. "Since your arrival, resonance has altered." Her luminous markings brightened incrementally. "Your neural pattern interacts unpredictably, stabilizing without submission." "Without submission," he repeated, processing. His implant displayed chaotic graphs smoothing into elegant curves whenever her pulse synchronized with his elevated heartbeat. The planet's magnetic field harmonics adjusted in tandem. He wasn't just a stranded pilot. He was a variable introduced into an equation generations in the making. "You're telling me I'm compatible software." Her expression softened again, and for a moment the overwhelming scale of her presence felt almost careful. Compatible anomaly, the translation offered. Around them the air pressure steadied, winds settling into gentle circulation. In the distance, clouds shifted as if repositioned by unseen hands. Dorian exhaled slowly. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me this week." But beneath the humor, tension coiled. He sensed it in the subtle tightening of the semicircle behind her, in the faint oscillation at the edge of his implant's detection range. long-range scans brushing the outer boundary of whatever concealment shield the island maintained. These giantesses were not hiding out of leisure. They were hiding from something vast enough to build them and strict enough to discard them. And somehow, inexplicably, he had become relevant. Dorian had always believed his most impressive skill was parallel parking a cargo shuttle in zero visibility. It turned out surviving as a biological anomaly inside a society of exiled planetary goddesses required slightly more finesse. The giantess who carried him, her name, once his implant finished trembling, resolved into Aranth Silvara, placed him upon a smooth stone plateau overlooking the sea. The stone warmed under her touch, responding like circuitry completing a circuit. He suspected the island listened to her the way his ship once listened to him, hopefully with less sarcasm. Aranth stood upright, and the horizon seemed to adjust around her. The luminous lines along her skin pulsed in layered rhythms now, no longer isolated fluctuations but structured sequences. Dorian's implant mirrored them unconsciously, projecting waveform models across his retinal display. Every time his heartbeat spiked, her resonance shifted in subtle compensation. He cleared his throat. Just so we're clear, I didn't consent to being part of an interstellar firmware update. A faint curve touched her expression. Consent remained central, the translation chimed. Her voice vibrated not only in the air but through the stone beneath his boots. Around them, the other giantesses formed a distant arc along the cliffside. They did not loom menacingly. They observed with quiet intensity, like astronomers watching a rare alignment. The sky above flickered almost imperceptibly, a distortion at the edge of visibility. His implant highlighted it in amber, long-range gravitational pings. Something was scanning this sector. Aranth extended one vast hand above him, not to seize him but to generate a low harmonic field. The wind stilled instantly. The ocean flattened into glass for 3 breathless seconds before resuming its natural rhythm. Detection pressure increases, she conveyed. The Empire tests outer boundaries. Dorian rubbed his temples. Of course they do. Nothing says relaxing island exile like authoritarian surveillance. He began pacing, which on a plateau beneath a being several hundred meters tall felt both bold and tragically comedic. Let me guess. Your resonance shield needs stabilization. I'm the unexpected patch that keeps the firewall intact. Her luminous markings brightened at that comparison. Accurate analogy. Your neural oscillations integrate without enforcing dominance protocols. Previous consorts required submission hierarchies. You do not. He paused mid-step. That might be the nicest insult I've ever received. His implant displayed complex graphs again, chaotic interference smoothing whenever he stood closer to her. The planet's magnetosphere synchronized with her pulses, and faint ripples of energy passed through the clouds like breathing. The island wasn't just terrain. It was an organism responding to a distributed nervous system. And somehow his presence dampened the volatility in that system. The other giantesses began resonating in layered harmonics, a choir of gravitational modulation that made the air thrum. For a moment Dorian felt weightless, as if gravity itself reconsidered its commitment. Above them the distortion intensified. A pinpoint of metallic glint pierced the upper atmosphere before dissolving. A probe. He swallowed. They're getting closer. Aranth lowered herself slightly, enough that her immense face aligned more closely with his level. Her eyes, storm-bright and unwavering, held no command, only possibility. There exists a protocol, she said. Ancient, voluntary neural bond, permanent alignment, stabilization ensured. Your physiology would adapt irreversibly. Departure would become impossible. Dorian blinked. You're offering me eternal residency with no return policy. He tried to laugh and succeeded halfway. The plateau beneath him vibrated faintly, tension rippling outward toward the sea cliffs. The choice was not hypothetical, it was mathematical. Without enhanced stabilization, the shield would degrade. The Empire would detect them. Exile would become eradication. Aranth's voice softened, harmonics lowering into something almost intimate. Refusal remains acceptable. We will not compel. He looked up at her towering silhouette against the sky, at the luminous patterns mapping across her like living constellations. These were not conquerors craving dominance. They were architects denied autonomy. He inhaled slowly, feeling the faint tug of resonance at the base of his skull like a door left slightly open. "Okay," he said quietly, managing a thin smile. "No pressure, except, planetary scale pressure." Above them, the sky flickered again. The Empire was still listening. The sky did not split open with dramatic lightning or descending warships. It simply tightened. A thin distortion stretched across the upper atmosphere like a wrinkle in reality, subtle but unmistakable. Dorian stared at it and felt something inside him settle. 3 days ago, he would have been calculating escape vectors, rerouting emergency beacons, prioritizing self-preservation with admirable cowardice. Now he was standing barefoot on a living plateau, looking up at an empire that built gods and discarded them, and thinking about choice. Aranth remained motionless behind him, towering, radiant lines across her skin pulsing in measured cadence. The other giantesses had formed a wide perimeter along the island's cliffs, their combined harmonics maintaining the planetary veil. The resonance wavered again. His implant projected red arcs through his vision, shield degradation accelerating. "There's no shuttle," he said quietly. "Even if I wanted to run, I'd be swimming." He glanced up at her enormous silhouette. "Not that I'm an Olympic candidate. Departure remains viable if you choose it," Aranth replied, though the strain in her harmonics betrayed the cost of that assurance. "We will divert energy to conceal your escape vector." He laughed softly. "You'd burn your own shield so I can go home and explain this in a debrief. Sorry, Command, I was briefly adopted by celestial titans." He shook his head. "I used to think freedom meant having no ties. Turns out it just meant never risking anything big enough to matter." Above them, a silver glint pierced the distortion again, this time sustained. A probe locking trajectory. The air pressure dipped sharply. Several of the giantesses staggered half a step, their luminous markings flickering under the increased gravitational interrogation. Dorian exhaled. "All right, let's stop pretending this is about survival alone." He turned fully toward Aranth. Even kneeling slightly, she dwarfed him, her storm-colored eyes focused entirely on his expression. There was no command in her gaze, no genetic mandate, only invitation. "If I agree," he said, forcing a smile, "I don't become your property, I don't become a stabilizing accessory." "Never," she answered immediately. "Alignment is mutual, authority is not required." He nodded once. "Good. Because I'm terrible at being decorative." The distortion intensified. Wind spiraled inward as if the sky were inhaling. The island's hum faltered. Dorian felt the faint pull again at the base of his skull, the open door waiting. Fear flickered through him, sharp, human, undeniable. He let it remain. Then he stepped forward until his hand touched the luminous surface of her finger. "Voluntary," he said. The bond ignited not as pain but as expansion. His neural implant overloaded and shut down instantly, yet awareness did not fade. It multiplied. He felt the magnetosphere curve around the planet, felt tidal gravity respond to Aranth's heartbeat, and now to his. Their patterns interlocked, not identical but complementary, chaotic edges smoothing into dynamic equilibrium. The shield surged outward in a silent pulse. High above, the probe's signal fractured, unable to resolve the anomaly. The distortion thinned, then unraveled. The sky relaxed. The other giantesses' harmonics steadied, brighter than before. The planetary field no longer strained under rigid hierarchy. It adapted, fluid and resilient. Aranth's luminous markings settled into a new configuration, intertwined subtly with the echo of his neural rhythm. Dorian swayed slightly. "Okay," he murmured. "That was intense. Also, I think I can hear the tides arguing in 3 languages." Aranth's laughter resonated through the cliffs, warm and astonishingly gentle. "You are integrated," she said, "not absorbed." He looked up at her, no longer dwarfed in spirit despite the impossible scale difference. He had not been conquered. He had chosen. The exile world was no longer hiding in defiance. It was thriving by design. "Guess I'm staying," he said lightly. "Someone has to represent average human height." She lowered herself further, bringing her vast face closer to his level, not to diminish him but to meet him. Around them, the island breathed in calm synchronization. The Empire had scanned and found nothing unusual, only a stable world in quiet orbit. Dorian gazed at the horizon, feeling the immense system he now helped sustain. Freedom had not vanished. It had deepened, and for the first time in his life, the vastness above him did not feel empty.